For over a century, the legendary tales surrounding our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me. That's why I'm on a personal mission to travel across the UK, visiting some of our most important airfields. I want to understand not only their contribution to our past, but also how many of them have helped shape our future. From the UK's first flight through to groundbreaking innovations like carbon fiber and the jet engine, an extraordinary amount of effort has gone into preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. Today we are at Bournemouth Airport, a small regional airport on England's south coast that now caters to about 1 million passengers a year, most of them heading off on holiday. But 70 years ago, life here was very different. Back then, during the Second World War, this place was known as RAF Hurn, and in those days, the skies above me would have echoed with the roar of hundreds of Allied aircraft. During World War II, RAF Hurn was operational for only 3 years, but its time as a transport and fighter airfield was put to good use. It was home to a range of aircraft including gliders, Mosquitoes, Wellingtons, and Typhoons. Hurn was built after the invasion threat of the summer of 1940. The Air Ministry believed another invasion could occur the following year, so a large number of defensive airfields were constructed along the south coast. Hurn was one of them. It was built during 1940-41 and opened on August 1, 1941. By that time, however, the threat of a second invasion had passed, so it wasn't needed for its original purpose. Hurn was used for training by airborne forces who were dropping paratroopers and practicing towing gliders that would be used on D-Day. Gliders were first employed in combat by the Germans. Because these engineless aircraft could glide silently to their targets, they allowed troops to be dropped precisely and in concentrated groups. It wasn't long before the UK and her allies developed their own glider force. The glider pilot regiment was deemed necessary following the German attack on the Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael in 1940. After the success of that German offensive, Winston Churchill decided that the ability to move men and materiel ahead of the front line was something Britain should develop. By February 1942, the glider pilot regiment was ready for battle. It was a cooperation between two forces. The pilots were recruited from the British Army but trained by the RAF. The first major glider operation of the Second World War was the assault on Sicily in 1943. The operations achieved their targets, but the losses were heavy. About 50% of the gliders landed in the sea, and many were hit by anti-aircraft fire on the way in. During World War II, there were 3 main Allied gliders. The Hadrian, made by the Americans, could carry 13 men and their equipment, but it was soon superseded by the British Horsa, which was larger and heavier. The biggest glider was the Hamilcar, capable of carrying heavy loads including light tanks. One problem during the Sicily landings, when Hadrian gliders were used, was that anti-tank artillery and the Jeep needed to tow. It had to be carried in separate gliders. If one glider failed to land or was lost, the load was useless. In subsequent operations, efforts were made to carry both Jeep and anti-tank gun in a single Horsa glider, ensuring a fully operational load as soon as it touched down. The Horsa was used by the glider pilot regiment in all its major operations. The prototype first flew on September 12, 1941, and it remained operational until 1945. Maneuverable in flight, it could carry up to 25 troops. Mainly constructed of plywood, it was 67 feet long with a wingspan of 88 feet and could glide at around 100 miles per hour. During the Second World War, the glider pilot regiment took part in 14 operations. These varied in size, some involving just 2 gliders, others nearly 700. Over the course of the war, they lost nearly 600 men killed in action, with many more wounded or taken prisoner. World War II gliders were often grimly referred to as flying coffins by their crews. To really understand the challenges these pilots faced, I've come here to the Buckminster Gliding Club, based at the former RAF Saltby. From this runway, aircraft and gliders once ferried lead elements of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division to Normandy on the eve of D-Day. This place is steeped in history, and with any luck, if the weather clears, I might see it from the air. Wartime gliders were towed most of the way by military transport aircraft. Because these were one-way missions, the gliders were considered disposable and made from common inexpensive materials such as wood. Thankfully, modern gliders are built from carbon fiber and made to last. Hello, Pete. Hi, Jules. Nice to see you. Thanks for this. I think the suit looks good on you. I've never flown in a glider before. I wonder if it'll be quiet, noisy, or bumpy. Today should be fairly calm, Pete says. But we can show you some turbulence by passing through the tug's prop wash just to give you a sense of wartime conditions. I'm ready. Let's go. It's quite bumpy as we lift off behind the tow plane. Once airborne, the rush of air is incredible. Pete banks gently to the right. Positioning us as a wartime glider would have been behind its tow aircraft. He shows me how even a small change in position can bring us into the prop wash, causing vibration. Wartime conditions with twin-engine or four-engine tugs and many aircraft in close proximity must have been very challenging. Even after a few minutes, I'm starting to appreciate what these glider pilots endured. Often flying at night, with no engine power and no second chances once the tow line was released. Being a glider pilot was one of the most dangerous jobs of the war. They suffered 50% casualties and earned over 170 awards for valor. During D-Day alone, 867 RAF and U.S. Air Force gliders flew to France, with around 100 pilots becoming casualties. We should also spare a thought for the troops they carried, who sat facing each other in the dark, unable to see where they were going. Many would have been terrified even before facing the enemy. Now Pete will demonstrate a steep descent, similar to what wartime horses would have done after release, diving quickly to the landing zone to reduce exposure to enemy fire. Releasing the tow in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now, Pete says. With the tow gone, we're flying independently. He increases speed to about 80 knots, replicating wartime conditions. This old runway saw men depart for occupied Europe, many never to return. Today, I trust Pete will bring us safely down, though he simulates an overshoot, diving sharply. The air brakes control our descent until we settle gently on the ground. Thankfully, no one's shooting at us. The Second World War wasn't just about fighting on land, at sea, and in the air. It also involved mental strategy, misleading the enemy, and shaping viewpoints. One way to do this was by spreading false information. In January 1943, 296 Squadron, flying out of Hurn, was tasked with a more subversive kind of transport operation, dropping leaflets. That might not sound like a war-winning operation, but I've come to WWII in Hampshire to learn more. Propaganda was spread throughout occupied countries by the Special Operations Executive, Churchill's secret army, engaged in espionage, reconnaissance, and sabotage. Hello, Lee. Hi, Jules. WWII was SOE's finishing school, where agents learned their tradecraft. Leafleting wasn't particularly aggressive, but it aimed to break enemy morale. It began on the very first night of the war. I've seen nearly every leaflet type produced. The political warfare executive decided what went into these leaflets. They hammered home Allied successes and the certainty of eventual victory. After major Allied wins, like El Alamein or the German defeat at Stalingrad, leaflets trumpeted these achievements. They also mentioned events like the 1,000-bomber raids on Cologne. Here's an official use-only booklet designed to encourage RAF crews to drop leaflets. Many crews found it interesting. Indeed, surviving leaflets are often those kept as souvenirs by the air crews themselves. Another leaflet lampoons Hitler's New Order, showing German soldiers looting French food and wine, undermining Nazi claims of prosperity under their rule. Lee explains the difference between white and black propaganda. White propaganda is openly issued by the Allies. Black propaganda pretends to be something it isn't. He shows me examples, including a sticker sent to the French resistance giving instructions on how a U-boat crewman could sabotage his own boat. Another piece is a forged ration coupon designed to sow chaos in Germany's distribution system. All of it aimed to make German life more difficult. In the months before June 1944, the Allies assembled and mobilized the largest invasion force in history. Along England's south coast, Including around Hurn, hundreds of thousands of men, vehicles, and supplies were prepared for Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of France, involving nearly 3 million troops, 5,000 fighters, and 6,000 ships. The date it launched became known as D-Day. With the Americans in the war from December 1941, planning accelerated. Before D-Day, Allied bombers targeted transportation hubs in northern France, preventing the Germans from quickly reinforcing their lines. Air bases like Hurn geared up well before June 1944. Troops assembled in ports opposite their target beaches in Normandy. Americans landed on Utah Beach, the British on Sword Beach. About 156,000 men landed on 5 beaches on D-Day alone. Allied planes provided close support, and Mosquitoes, slightly heavier bombers, attacked bigger targets like fortifications. Without the glider pilot regiment's targeted operations, the German counterattack could have been disastrous. The night before D-Day, they delivered explosives and supplies. Although expecting minimal resistance, they encountered a determined enemy. One pilot landed off target and avoided capture and summary execution. Eventually, he and his crew reached the rendezvous, delivering crucial medical supplies. An engineering officer commandeered their jeep to blow a vital bridge, preventing German armor from advancing. After 3 days, the glider crews returned to the UK, having completed 10 vital operations during the war. The glider pilot regiment was disbanded in 1957, but it left a proud legacy. Once the Normandy beaches were secured, transport ships unloaded men, vehicles, artillery, and tanks, including the British Churchill tank. Today, I'm meeting Nigel, who has restored one of these. The Churchill tank served through D-Day, often supporting infantry. Designed not to fight enemy tanks head-on, it advanced at infantry pace, taking out obstacles and fortified positions while the troops protected it from anti-tank weapons. Overhead, Allied aircraft like Typhoons provided close air support. This coordination of arms, infantry, armor, and air, was crucial. Nigel invites me to sit inside the tank's cramped interior. Its crew of 5 had limited visibility and relied on each other. The bond between crew members was strong, like that among air crews. Nigel encourages me to try starting and moving the tank. The pedals and controls are basic, but the feeling is intense, like sitting inside a mechanical beast. It makes me think of my grandfather, who served in such a tank as Allied aircraft soared above. By the end of D-Day, the Allies had established a foothold in Normandy at great cost, some 10,000 casualties. Securing the beaches and strategic towns would take more time. By late August 1944, Paris was liberated. Allied planes moved from Britain to France, and RAF Hurn's military role ended. In August 1944, the Air Ministry decided Hurn would be used as a civilian airfield for BOAC, Britain's national airline at the time. Unlike airports today, this wasn't a place for ordinary people to think about flying. War still loomed, and it would be a long time before the public could use airline services. Initially, Britain's only international airport was Hurn. It served routes to Iberia, North Africa, Cairo, and the Middle East using converted Lancaster bombers called Lancastrians. These flights took 67 hours to reach Sydney, stopping 3 nights en route. When London Heathrow opened in 1946, airlines moved there, leaving Hurn to find a new role. Vickers Armstrong took over its hangars to produce Varsity trainers and Viscount airliners, including parts for the legendary Concorde. After production ended in 1984, the airport reinvented itself again. Today, many original hangars host companies that maintain and service aircraft. Business aviation is common here. I meet Mike, who shows me immaculate hangars filled with aircraft from around the world. He explains that private jets have become business tools, not just toys of the wealthy. He invites me onto a Hawker jet. The engineers test landing gear by raising and lowering it using hydraulic power. It's fascinating to see how these technicians keep planes airworthy, a far cry from the wartime gliders and bombers. Before private jets, Bournemouth's first civilian flights served military VIPs and the wealthy. As air travel became cheaper, package holidays grew. One company, Bath Travel, left a lasting mark on Bournemouth Airport. Started in 1924 by Reginald Bath, expanded by his son Peter, it offered personal service. Peter wrote letters to every passenger, solved their problems, and built loyalty. Over time, competition from low-cost carriers forced Bath Travel's airline, Palmair, to close, but not before creating lasting memories. They even brought Concorde to Bournemouth once. What began as RAF Hurn during World War II, created for conflict, managed to survive, thrive, and evolve. Today, Bournemouth Airport is a holiday gateway. Most passengers have no idea they're following in the vapor trails of the typhoons that once roared across the Channel to Normandy more than 70 years ago.